math is a way of describing the rhythms of the universe, and divination is how we are starting to perceive those rhythms and the patterns and putting them together. So it doesn't have to be so complicated, and it can be fun. I love when the math works.
Welcome to Coffee and Divination, a podcast about the arts of obtaining hidden knowledge in changing times. Join me, Joanna Farrar, to chat with experts from around the world on tarot, runes, geomancy, and the many ways divination can help us navigate and plan our paths ahead.
Today's episode is an interview with the brilliant Laura Tempest Zakroff, professional artist, author, dancer, and modern traditional witch. In our conversation today, we talked a lot about their most recent book, Tarot by Tempest, playing with numbers, meaning, and movement. We also talk about the nature of play and how important we feel it is in both magic and divination as a doorway. It is also an exploration of movement and art as spiritual technologies and how embodiment can change the way we read, how we understand situations in our lives, and how we can get creatively unstuck. Before we dive into this excellent conversation with Laura, I have a quick personal update. Pre-orders for my book, The Diviner's Path, are now officially available. This will be coming out from Llewellyn on June 8th of this year. The book is all about becoming a more skillful, grounded diviner in multiple forms of divination, as well as how to ask better questions, build our symbolic fluency, and develop a practice that is personal and supports our lives. The pre-order link is in the show notes, and I just want to say I've been really touched by the messages some of you have sent to me after pre-ordering. It truly means a lot, and pre-orders are genuinely important for authors, so thank you for supporting the work. If you enjoy this show, share it with a friend, and of course you can find me on Instagram where I am at Coffee and Divination. Our YouTube channel is also where there is going to be a lot more videos coming out on a number of different topics, all in preparation for the book launch. Now, please enjoy this wonderful conversation with Laura Tempest Zakroff.
It is my pleasure to have on the show someone who I have looked forward to speaking with as a guest and have been happy to meet in person at Sacred Space this past year, and that is Laura Tempest Zakroff. It is my pleasure to have you here with us, and thank you for making time.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me.
So we have a traditional first question on the show, since this is a podcast that focuses on divination, and that is, what was your first introduction or the first memory that you have that involves divination? Was it something that was, a part of your childhood? Was it something that you came to later, somebody in your family? What is the story of that for you looking back?
I think there's so many methods and superstitions involved in divination, like whether we're tossing coins, to bring luck or to make a decision, and playing with beads and sort of shells and all that kind of things. But it's in the more formal scope of things, in that I'm sitting down to do this seriously is around 18, which is when I got my first tarot deck.
And were you interested in magic or have any kind of background before that? Or was sort of tarot one of the early parts of that, kind of diving into that?
It definitely predates that. It was definitely one of those weird kids, mixing potions in the backyard in my little, practically a Baba Yaga hut, and interested in mythology from around the world. And around 12 or 13 is when I read The Mists of Avalon. So that at the time was a gateway drug to discovering there are other people, doing magical things. And of course, the other thing for my generation is Mysteries of the Unknown. The Time Life series mixed with In Search Of. So all of the, mysterious and the paranormal and the magical, it's always been on the periphery. But for some reason, it just took that long for me to get to a deck.
Yeah. And just before we dive into more of the occult subjects, what was your sort of family's reaction to having a Baba Yaga in the backyard? I'm just curious.
So the little cabin, my grandfather and my father built it for me, apparently in nursery school. They couldn't find me, and I was in the playhouse. They're like, we've lost this child, and I am doing, all totally comfortable in my little cabin, doing what you should, right? That they're like, well, perhaps we need to do one of these at home. And I'm the youngest of three with a big difference between my brothers and myself. So uh, they're just like, yep, this one's a strange one.
We'll make
But
room for
we're
that.
all weird, right?
Yes. So you basically then came to tarot later than the other weird kid stuff, which is totally makes sense. Was when you then went to tarot, was that something that became really important to you right away, or was this something that was like, pull some cards every now and then? Like, what was it at that point for you?
I think it definitely sidelined right into obsession. It was a very short journey. Ooh. It also happened to be that at the same time, so my first deck was Legend, the Arthurian Tarot, which was published by Llewellyn for many, 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 many years. But I also at college was taking a class on Arthurian romance. So it just fed into each other because here's all these myths and stories that are referenced in the deck, and I'm reading the original source material, Mallory and Tennyson and Sir Gawain and the Green Knight and all that. Like, oh, these things go together. So it fueled that and also fueled my desire to create my own decks and play with it more. So it was all the things all at once.
Yes, absolutely. And as a part of, so you were studying the Arthurian myths, it played into the tarot and all of that. This is a part of, I'm sure many of the people who are listening are aware that you are a very multifaceted artist, but if they are not, can you tell us a little bit about your journey as an artist and what was going on kind of in your young life when you were, becoming the artist that you are now?
Sure. So I've been fine arts, particularly the visual arts, have been a part of my life, pretty much all of my life. I got sent off to art school very, very young. Again, there's the weird kid. Sports don't seem to be working out. Let's try something safer. So I was going to formal art school very, very young, and that continued all the way to college. And I saw the arts, especially visual arts, as a means to express myself and to tell my own mythology and, you know, get really obsessive about details like mermaid scales and dragon scales and fashion design because also of the generation of fashion plates, like all of those things put together um, became, was part of my outlet. And then realizing as I was in high school that I could make the choice of being academic because I have 4.0 GPA as well. Again, weird kid, artsy kid, put together. And like, do I really want to do the liberal arts or do I want to do visual arts? And that was the choice to apply to art school. And I went to and got accepted to RISD, the Rhode Island School of Design. And that solidified the path of like, well, we're taking this very seriously. So I guess I'm not going to be a marine biologist.
Diving into the deeps in a different way, though. It's
Yes.
just different type of the deep oceans. So that connection to art and that connection to the visual arts, particularly, of course, does then have a lot to do with many of the works that you are very well known for, particularly the book Sigil Witchery. You have a number of works through Llewellyn that are about the applications of magic and also the symbolical sort of systems of magic and kind of that visual component to it. We're going to dive more into the oracular and divinatory side of this, but were you creating the form of like sigil magic that you've put into the book, would you say earlier on than when you went to college? Was that something that you think when you were the Baba Yaga little kid, you were somehow playing around with? Or how did that kind of come about in that journey?
I remember this very distinct moment when I was like three, 3 or 4, where I was making signs that seemed very runic that I explained to my parents were to protect the trees. I wish I still had.
I would love to see those. Yes.
Right? I was like, what was going on there? So that's like, but it's a very clear memory of that. And I was obsessed with hieroglyphics and cuneiform and all of that through the grade school years. So when I was getting into high school and kind of developing my own unique art style, as I was very much influenced by that kind of mark making of, what do these lines mean? So I'm looking at cave paintings and you're looking at hieroglyphics and I'm looking at Southwestern pottery and, all these different creations from around the world, which also have a similarity to them. And like, there's a common language here. And what does that mean? And as I'm applying lines and marks and symbols in my work, I'm telling a narrative to myself. So that narrative of the line and the shapes became the sigil witchery because it's telling some. It's just not just, oh, pretty decoration, right? It's not just a motif. It's meant to express something or hide something in there. So that's where it came from.
Yes. And so in your most recent work, which is tying a lot of these ideas into traditional tarot, you have created a number of beautiful decks, several of which I have sitting in my box of divination over there. That in this case, I was happy to be able to take part and be at your class that you taught that dove into some of these ideas at Sacred Space. And part of that was that you immediately went back to showing people the central symbolic ideas that are some of the oldest in human history. And I think that it would be really interesting, particularly for people who are fascinated with divination, if you could just talk about those sort of like symbols that are the most ancient, because I feel like people, when you say symbol or sign, it can get a little confusing for people what we're really talking about.
Right, because the language, words have meanings, right? All of those things. So the ones I reference in choreomancy was the workshop that you were able to attend, is which is on that word. Speaking of, people are like, what is that? It's like divination and dance, divination through movement is that source. So the part of the references I showed was Genevieve von Petzinger, anthropologist, archaeologist, who discovered or created the theory of the 32 signs, which is these 32 images, mark symbols that span a period of 10,000 years over a large area of the earth where humanity was using these same symbols, which we still use today, where it's, from a handprint to a zigzag to a hatch mark, triangles, circles, spirals, these things, we see them again and again. In part of Genevieve's work is, what do they mean, right? She has a book called The First Signs, and she's got documentaries now. But for us, it's very much influenced by who we are and how old we are, what our background is. And so that's important to me about in divination and in sigil crafting is, what do these things mean to you? And what can you do to trust your intuition on that? Which a lot of people, especially coming into magic and into divination, be like, I have to go refer to the book. Like, stop. Stop. You have lived a life up until this point. Take a moment and look at these things. So
yes. So there's that interplay, which is between the symbols and the signs that are clearly something that are extremely important to all of us as humans, because they are found literally in the oldest art we have. And then there's the tension between, like, just because we see those marks on the wall, it doesn't necessarily mean that we can say exactly what they meant to those ancient people or what it means to you or me specifically without doing the work to dive into that.
yes.
Do you feel like then, I feel like since you have the training of a professional visual artist, I mean, is that something that I feel sometimes a little bit of the hesitancy that sometimes people have around the arts themselves, just in general, whether we're talking about like visual arts or dance or performance, and the same kind of I don't want to say concerns or possibly lack of confidence that people might have in their own ability to judge the divination in front of them and their own relationship to symbols. How would you say that your work as a visual artist helps you sort of get people to the other side of that feeling of not being sure of themselves that way?
Well, it starts with really starting to see, right? When I'm teaching witchcraft, I tell folks like witchcraft is 80% observation, 20% candles, cats, cookies, and cauldrons, right? There are other stuff. And we are so quick to look at something and decide that's what it means, and it's this or that, right? Part of my circle, other. And when we're divining, right, we're looking for patterns and we need to get a little bit deeper into what is truly there, not just what we think is there on the surface or what we immediately react to, but what is actually happening. How does it make it feel? How does it make us feel? How are we perceiving this at a different level, so that we can see and understand those patterns? And to also recognize that art is for everyone. Going back to those cave paintings and these marks, and as I mentioned, like they show up all over the world, is we often have art squeezed out of us, right? Like we all are making art as children, same way we're all using our imagination and playing, hopefully, as children. And then as we grow up, we're told to discard all of that. It's not important. It's not going to give you a career. You're not going to end up in a gallery or museum. Like, this is not the point. Right? You don't need to be a professional psychic and know all of the things, which you won't. Anyway, and you don't need to be a professional artist, and nor is the museum the end point, right? We should be making art to explore ourselves, our psyches, to express ideas to each other about our societies, about our dreams. Just the play part of it is so important. And so to allow yourself to relax and play, have some fun, in order to get into it. Like, it's not, don't take it so serious.
Yeah, I find it very fascinating that I think sometimes while I think you and I both think that these things should be taken seriously, there are elements of this that are very serious, and we put them in that serious category when we need to put that hat on. But so
Mhm.
much of it is also much more playful than people give themselves the permission to have, and I
Yes.
appreciate the emphasis on that. I also feel like I wanted to ask you from the perspective of art, particularly in this modern age. there's a I've had a few people say to me when talking about their attempts at making art or doing things that are more artistic within witchcraft or divination, that they can't make things that look witchy enough, and therefore they're not sure if it's correct or if it'll work. And I feel like there's an element of the play, which is, yeah, it should look, if making it look witchy works for you, that's great. But
Mhm.
how do you feel like dealing with the sort of, now sometimes I feel like maybe an overemphasis on the witch look as opposed to something that might not look witchy but is.
If it's made by a witch, it's witchy.
Perfect. And we have it solved. I agree.
Right. What does it even mean? I know some folks are like, it's usually a particular group of people when it comes to sigils, right? That they have to be these clean lines. It looked like it was made by a computer. Like, I'm not a computer. I maybe a living computer, who knows? But none of us are that. And I love the hand-drawn aspect of things, and it doesn't have to look perfect, and it doesn't need to be, it doesn't need to look like what I make. Mine do have my own special little flair, but even if you use my method, it's still going to look like who you are and what you bring to it, to the process. And the idea, and I tell this to artists all the time, especially young artists who are coming up, and they're like, so and so said I should do this and I should do that and then catch on to this trend because these are really selling. I'm like, well, do you want to do that? Is that what's important to you? Is that something that you feel in your bones you must create and make? Like, if you are obsessed with, I don't know, making pictures of slugs, and someone tells you you shouldn't be doing slugs, you should be doing snails, I'm like, do the slugs. Make the slugs. And because you're being, this is going to sound really crazy, because you're being authentic to being the slugs, it will get the success that it needs, because that authenticity will show through versus, oh, everything needs to be, dark, black, spooky, ooky, covered in blood. Like, not that there's anything wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. But my art is a riot of color. And even if I was like, I'm going to do something dark and spooky, it still shows up with lots of color.
Yes. And I also love lots of color. So I agree. But it's great to have room for all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
So speaking, I kind of would keep it in that same sort of art vein, because there's another thing that strikes me as similar. When people are divining or trying to interpret something, sometimes the difficulty that I've noticed with people is knowing when an interpretation is done. Do you know what I mean? Like, you can be looking at a reading and you could keep on looking for more and more layers and maybe turn yourself around in some knots. And that's similar in some way to deciding when a piece of art is done. Like when you actually put the brush down and you say, no, this is where it ends. Like, how do you think about that process? And I'm sure like we could also tie that into, when do you know that like an oracle deck that you have been working on, something you've been creating and it is your baby, like how do you get to a point where you're like, no, now we can step away from it?
Never.
And never.
Yeah. Never. No, that is really fascinating. So, I think there's kind of three different points of that, in that in divination, it comes down to trust, like trusting your intuition and the initial messages you get. And I think when people get into that, let's say more dangerous territory of questioning and going, round in circles, is especially if you're reading for somebody else and they're like, I don't know, that doesn't make sense. It's like, just let it sit. Because every time someone has ever said that to me, they come back, whether it's 15 minutes later, an hour, a week, a month, whatever, and they're like, oh my God, like, because you're like, oh, it doesn't gel, so I must be wrong. And then you start going around and it gets clouded. It's like, no, just be like, that's what I got. Cut it off, right? That's where it is. And when it comes to a single piece of artwork, for me, it's, once I'm in the moment and getting into it, it's a vibe, and like it's getting to a place, and then the brain goes, I think it might be time to step away, right? And I have what I call the look at phase, right? To just like kind of look at or stare at phase, which is where like it's mostly done, and to the rest of the world, done. But I need to come back and look at it in different lighting. Or, if I've been looking at it flat, I need to put it up and then see it from a different angle. And I got the paint still ready, where I'm just going to go in and go like, boop, and boop. I'm also greatly impatient. So I work in acrylics. I love oils, but I do not have the patience to sit there. But also have 4 cats, so these things do not go together. All of my art has cat hair in it. Oil paint would collect even more cat hair, and it's very traumatic. Dangerous to have cats involved with oil paint. So the kind of the necessity and my personality goes together for that. When it comes to an oracle deck, it's an ongoing process that's a balance of the intellectual and the creative, and what does the entity of the deck want. So, because I feel like they have a personality to themselves. Each of my decks are, I feel like they're drastically different. People are like, I can tell you did all of these. I'm like, how? They look very different to me. You line up the current 4 and other 2 that are in progress. And I'm like, people are going to think I'm a Gemini, so I'm allowed to have multiple personalities, right? It's fine. But it's done where I feel like the intellectual work that I've done in problem solving what the deck is supposed to solve, which is which cards, how is it going to create, how the cards are going to work with each other, what messages are being created, the art layering of that. And then I still leave a little bit of room. So like each deck that I've done, there's probably going to be a couple cards that change from here we are at the beginning in the list of cards to the final end, where I'm like, oh wait, I'll wake up in the middle of the night, I'm missing a labyrinth card, and this deck needs a labyrinth card. And so I'm either going to change the art or move something around, or be like, guess what? We're going from 46 to 48 cards. That's fine, right? This is fine. So tapping into what the project needs. And I think maybe the overarching thing is like, what is needed in divination is to deliver the message and let it sit. What's needed for art, get into the vibe, do the thing, but then give yourself some time to play with it, because, you know, but you can always make more art, and you can always pull more cards or do another spread, and you can always make another oracle deck.
Yes. And you are mid-process. Oh, we'll get to that a little later. I will not dive into that yet. That is very true. So with that sort of giving yourself space to let something sit, when you are encouraging people to decide sort of what to go to first, what do you find in your practice that you go to as one of your main forms of divination? If you have a question for yourself, mm-hmm. what do you turn to? Or does it depend on the question?
It does depend on the question. Like if I am thinking of, a topic for, I do a weekly Patreon Zoom with my folks. I've been doing that since March 2020, pretty much every single week. And sometimes you're like, what should we talk about tonight? And so I'll pull an oracle card, likely from the Liminal Spirits or Anatomy of a Witch. It's like, here's an insight in my brain. What does my brain want to tell me? And that gives a nice foundation for where do I want to go, especially if it's a magical discussion or, whatever is happening in the moment. If it's something about my life that I need to figure out that just involves me, then it's going to be the tarot deck. I'm going to pull out the deck and look at it. So, from a where do I need to go with this idea, explore a larger topic, to what WTF is going on, it's going to be tarot.
So I feel like before we go and talk about the oracle decks, let's talk about the most recent book then. So why this book? And why did you feel like you were finally like, it's like, yeah, this book now, this is the time?
So Tarot by Tempest, I've been reading for 30 years now. And teaching tarot, probably like 20, 25, 26-ish in there. So like kind of when I first started being like, let's try teaching this along with the other metaphysics I'm doing. But during the early darkest parts of the pandemic, I started doing virtual workshops, and I have a rotation of 24 different workshops that I can teach. But I thought, like, why don't I bring back some of that tarot material? Because I do bring up in Anatomy of a Witch in the book, as you go through the anatomy, I also go through from the Fool to the Hermit, and talk about how these cards can tap into our body and our exploration and such. And people are like, that's really fascinating. So I'm like, well, let me bring out let me bring up Tempest tips for tarot sort of thing. And I did like kind of 4 to 5 hour intensive for that, because I also don't like to do weekly classes. Like I have to count on other people being like, you're gonna be there, we're gonna sit down and do this for 4 hours, here we go. And I bring in a lot of my concepts, which a lot of it is based in numbers, which makes people nervous. But to me, there's very much numbers are connected to the rhythms of the shapes and the patterns, and to dance, and to all of these things. So explaining how I use numbers to remember the meaning, connect the major arcana to the minor arcana, and kind of avoid doing the little white book. It's like, here I am, like it's kind of the stupid human trick of like, hey, you're at a party. Oh, I heard you read cards. Oh, I don't have my deck with me. Oh, well, here's this random one, right? And you're like, well, we're drunk. Let's do this, right? So some deck you've never pulled before, but you can still give accurate readings because here's this approach. And as it happens, like as I share what I think is my weird perspective on things, people are like, this is blowing my mind. You should write a book on it. I was like, oh, yeah, I guess that is a different perspective. And so it came into being where it merges the number approach, the symbolism that we cover in choreomancy, as well as movement, which can help us determine more about divination. So all of the art, the math, and the movement coming together And it pretty much is what my editor called, this is like weave the liminal for tarot.
Yes,
So
great description. I think that's yeah, because I'm a big fan of Weave the Liminal as a book. That's a beautiful one that I recommend highly to anyone who's listening who hasn't read it. Um, it's also interesting because what I think is beautiful about what you are pointing out there is the embodiment of tarot and the connection between number and symbol and movement as well as color and the other things that we might more easily associate with a visual art like staring at a tarot card. It is a visual form of divination because you are using symbols that are drawn, but it doesn't mean that it takes away its other aspects, which involves sort of other arts, including math as an art. Can you talk about, I mean, like, in what sense or why do you think people have resistance to that? Or are there things that you've noticed when you've helped people sort of break down that resistance that helps?
yes. So especially here in the United States, our education system is special. I don't mean the good kind. And so we often connect math with fear, frustration, things being complicated, being like, oh, you have to be smart, all of these things. And it's not about applied math in what we're going to use in our daily life and seeing patterns and rhythms. It's often like, oh, calculus, oh, learn these formulas. And we're never really taught, for most people, I've noticed, and I've heard, is that you're not really taught, like, why? Why does this make that? And how does this work? Like, one of the main things that I remember in high school that was mind blowing is because I moved to South Carolina in the middle of my high school, it changed the order of classes that I was supposed to take. So I ended up taking algebra. No, actually, I ended up taking geometry and chemistry at the same time, which wouldn't have happened because geometry was like a lower class in the South than it was in the North. I don't know. But what we were covering in chemistry and the fractions and the geometry, just like they went together so well. Then like now I'm understanding why the cells are shaped this way and why these chemical compounds are working this way and why we have this happening in math. Like it just layered so well, but that does, like, even in that school, like, except for the fact that I came from a different school, I was with a whole other class of people. Like in one class, my age group, the other younger people, like they weren't taught together. And like, this is a thing, is that we're not doing, we're not helping people with how things are taught in ways that really help us use the material instead of being geared towards testing it and all that sort of stress. So it comes back to play, right? If you're able to play and see the connections, it becomes more fun. And so I think that's where a lot of our issues come from, is that we have a lot of hangups about math and immediately think it's got to be complicated and it's got to be, this order of operations that you don't remember anymore because you used it once and you failed that test. But math is a way of describing the rhythms of the universe, and divination is how we are starting to perceive those rhythms and the patterns and putting them together. So it doesn't have to be so complicated, and it actually can be fun. I love when the math works.
I totally agree. I would not consider myself someone who is good at math. So I just want to put that caveat out there that I'm saying that I agree with you from the perspective of someone who didn't get the good test results on those tests that you're mentioning. And yet it can be very philosophically interesting. So from like a mental perspective, and then also symbolically, and from a divinatory perspective, very, very interesting. So you mentioned that the title of the class at Sacred Space was choreomancy, and it involved movement. So, but why? Why would there be movement with divination? I am sitting here and I am playing the role of someone who says, no, I'm going to sit in my chair right now. I'm going to lay the cards out. So what is this moving thing?
Yeah, the other terrifying thing, the movement. Art, math, movement, all these things together. So movement is often responding to math, right? To rhythm and to pattern. When we're dancing to a song and we're bopping along to something, Math is the underlying factor there that creates that rhythm and the consistency that makes you want to move, right? And our bodies are working at different chemical and mathematical processes all the time, right? So there's at the subatomic level, we are moving and we are mathing. Moving and mathing. It's very, very fancy. And then it comes to the art representation of it. When we look at the numbers, when we look at the shapes, when we look at figures, there is a reason why, if you look up any deity, right, whether it's Pan, whether it is Shiva, Baba Yaga, right, pretty much you go any pantheon, any deity around the world, if you look up art of that deity, there are going to be similarities, and particularly how they are portrayed, what posture that they're in, how they're depicted in moving, how the shape of their bodies, what shapes their bodies are making. And what is tarot but a collection of moving images and many, many decks, not all decks, right? Not all, but even then, inanimate objects are creating rhythms and patterns. So when we look at these court cards and the figures, how are they standing, sitting, moving, dancing? What's happening in both the major and minor arcana? And if you think about it, and you look at the emperor, right, sitting in the throne, right, this very, at number 4, this very rectangular, very squared off shape that's very strong and used for foundation. And you're sitting in a way that's very upright and stiff, in line with that chair. It feels different than the Empress, who's casually sitting at number 3, kind of relaxed, right? And which way they're facing is they're looking directly at you, looking away to the left or to the right. And not that you have to get up and be like, okay, here's the Knight of Wands. What are they doing? All right, here I am on my horse. How does this feel? I mean, you could, but I wouldn't say like for every card that you like jump up and like dance it, especially if you're reading for somebody else, though that might be really entertaining.
Really interesting for both parties. You never know.
Right? They're like, what is happening? It's disco tarot. Which feels, I feel like Madame Pomita would probably be like, yes.
Yes.
Did a tarot party at PantheaCon years ago. That was like a studio.
That sounds like a very, very good vibe then.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. So which gets you like every card, you could have a whole soundtrack, right? How does it move? How does it sound? How will those things go in? But you get a clue instead of being, very much tied up into, all right, what does this card mean? And what does the little white book say? Like, take a moment. How does your body feel in that position? Standing, moving, sitting, laying down with 10 swords on you. Right?
So good, that one. I can.
This is fine. Totally fine. That gives you an insight. So even, I wouldn't say you have to do it for readings, though it would be cool for meditation. Right? Imagine that, like, here, go over here. Side quest. So imagine that you are really wanting to work in High Priestess energy, right? Maybe you've done a reading and that card was central to what you want to do, and you're like, all right, I need to get courage. I need to like work past my fears. I need to become one with the spiritual mystery of things. And what if you did a moving meditation that tapped into that and like kind of feel it in your own body? Then that is a way of working magic. And kind of resetting, because especially if you're tense, like what if you're fearful and you're afraid, you're often curling your body up, right? And you're stressed out and everything is, tied up in knots. But you're like, what if I did sit strong and proud and calm and breathe and felt like I was by the shore side and seeing the moon phases go by me? Like that shift can alter your brain, and that magic starts with thought. It begins with thought. And so then we're also beginning that reprogramming that we need for ourselves. So it comes back to movement. Movement will get you there a lot quicker than a lot of words, which I know I used a lot of words to say that.
No, absolutely. And that sort of embodied feeling of the tarot also helps to move what can trip, I think, some people up of keeping readings or keeping their attempt to figure out what something means, if you've kept it completely in the head and only in the things that you've either read in the little white book, or keywords can be great, but if that's not also translating into how does that actually feel in your body, how would it feel to be in that position, then you might be missing some of the insights or the connections that would more quickly occur if you actually said, oh, I feel what that is. Now I see what that's pointing to instead. So yeah, that's,
Yes.
yeah. And that, I feel like that does go towards sometimes our hesitancy, even as a culture, to move. That's something where I feel, unfortunately, kind of similar to probably what you have heard from people with creating sigils and things like that of, oh, I'm not an artist, of now the also, but can I move like that? I'm not a dancer. I'm not like you. How do you help people sort of get through that and be more embodied? That's a topic of many of your books and your writings, but that embodiment within magical practice as well as divination. Can you give us some of your thoughts on that?
Yes. So when I have the opportunity, especially in person, but it's described in Anatomy of a Witch and a little bit in the tarot book as well, is getting people into their bodies. That's the first challenge because, as you said, yeah, we exist a lot in our heads, and our brains are liars. So you have to gauge the rest of the body. Start with a simple breathing exercise. What I call my kind of the three breaths, right? Which is a short breath, a medium breath, and then a long breath. And that how long you hold it and exhale, right? Which shifts your brain. It kind of disconnects your brain enough. And then I get people to start with their feet. And we work our way up to rebalancing the body and being present. And I introduce people to some friends that are really ridiculous and fun. They're metaphorical ideas, like including kittens. And suddenly you're petting kittens. You're standing there and petting imaginary kittens in space, but you're relaxed and you can feel those kittens, which sounds crazy, but 100% works because it's so ridiculous that you stop thinking about this is dumb, or I can't believe I'm moving, or I shouldn't be moving, or I shouldn't be making art, or I should be mathing, right? It's enough to trip the brain up, and it works every time.
Yeah. And that, once again, the magic word of play also, because then when we can allow ourselves to play, then we can bypass some of the things that might be artificially keeping us stuck or in patterns that we are intending to do the divination or the magic to change anyway. So when it comes to bringing the you mentioned like the major arcana and some of those other figures. We mentioned the ten of swords. Are there any other examples that you think, particularly from court cards, which I've had some people comment are a little tricky for them, that you feel like there are movements like the knights in some sense, or the pages of like, how do you think of those interacting with the body and like how we view them inside of ourselves?
So the knights are really interesting because I see knights as so I see pages as messages. If we're gonna, we use traditional name. Pages are messenger bringers, and that's their job, right? That's their courtly position, is to bring messages, and they are youthful, right? They are in training, so there's that combination. And then knights go and fight battles and defend the land. They are the journeying thing. Like their whole thing is to go on quests, right? To explore and to be very active, where the king and the queen, the higher ups, right, are more stuck in their places that everything else revolves around. So when we look at those knight cards, what are the horses doing, right? Because the horses are part of the movement. Like I'm not just saying like, just look at the dudes. Like, what's going on? Which is also more fun if you know a bit about horses and equestrian showmanship and such. Which it's like, why is this horse rearing? Is it showing off? Is it going this way? Is it going that way? Is it moving up and around and taking off? Like we've seen enough movies. If you've seen westerns or anything like that has a lot of horses in it, then you have seen some classic symbolism of how horses are used for movement and interact with their riders. So it's not just the rider itself, it's the horse's movement as well. It's like, okay, is this a difficult journey? Is there a lot of chaos happening in here, or does it seem like really quiet and sedate? And you're like, that horse is a rock. It's just sitting there. Where the pages, like how are they delivering a message? What's their body language like as well? In the I think it was at the end of the choreomancy class where we did a spread and we pulled, I think it was the world card, and there were 2 pages. And what was really fascinating was the, the body, the position of the figure on the world card kind of mirrored a little bit what's going on with the pages, which was really fascinating. It's like, what does this mean for what's going on right here? And so it's not just what's happening in the card, it's what's happening across the cards. Do we see one particular direction that everybody's facing or moving, or are they just mimicking each other again and again? Because that's a really strong message. Or do we see 2 cards that are really different, like very different body language happening in there? So yeah, it's like if we start thinking about we can think about court cards as people, but we can also see them as a message, a journey, a way that we ourselves are encountering that message or experience.
Yeah. And that's also crucial to be looking at then the motion of not just what is considered the key figure on the card or the one that's the most obvious, but what other motion is happening in the card. And as you mentioned, motion that is implied then between the cards in an entire spread of where people are looking or moving or directionality, which then again, if you're paying attention to that more motion and activity rather than just keyword and sort of mental focus, then that will be a lot more obvious in what that could be saying.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So speaking of embodiment, you have a new project that is going to be in the works that as of this recording already is wonderfully, happening and has been announced, though it is very early on. Can you tell people about what that awesome oracle is going to be?
Yes, so I am doing a dual oracle project called The Lantern, a New England folk oracle. And it is the 2 decks. One is by land and one is by sea, which if you are a nerd, if you're a history nerd or dad, perhaps familiar with Longfellow's poem about Paul Revere and the mythology of to warn the people, 1 lantern by land or 2 if by sea, to go in there. I was like, oh, we can do 2 decks. First one, land deck. Second one, sea deck. So I amuse myself way too much, and I still find months into this funnies thing.
Fantastic.
So it's I realized that New England, I live in Rhode Island. It likes to call itself the heart of New England, but there are a lot of arguments about what the heart of New England is, and I'm not getting into it. Unless I do a Rhode Island centric deck. But this is all of the whole of New England. I realized that there isn't a deck for this area. I was doing a Witches Night Out Market a couple of years ago where I do mini lectures, and one was on oracles, and I was like, here's some of my favorite oracles of, oh, this is a Pacific Northwest one, and this is a Southwest one, and here is Stacy's Southern Gothic oracle. I'm like, darn it, New England doesn't have one. So I reached out to Stacy and I was like, hey, so you have the Southern Gothic oracle, and there's this and that. And I was like, what do you think about New England one? She's like, do you want to do it? Just where I get myself into trouble.
Well, when you put it out there.
Like, I have an idea, and I'm the one who's going to have to do it because that's how it works. So yeah, and that development of starting from like a little oracle into a 2-deck oracle, because there is so much folklore here that it warranted 2 decks. Yeah, and it's right now at like over 500% funded. Broke 800 backers today, and it's just thing.
That is wonderful. So I'm assuming then, I mean, you've mentioned you are based in New England, and it's an extremely like place-based piece of work that you're going to be endeavoring on. Is there something about the process of making this deck that you think will be different from others because of that sort of like place-based nature of it? Or is it Do you feel like you have your way that you think through the creation of these and it's going to follow that? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so my previous decks on the first three that I've done, the Liminal Spirits, Anatomy of a Witch, and the Sigil Witchery Oracle, I saw them as distinctly for problem solving, right? People need to connect more with the spirits around them, very animistic approach. People need to connect with their bodies. Let's say and figure out what's going on, spells and rituals. Teaching sigil witchery to thousands of people. People were like, I don't know any symbols or shapes. I'm like, okay, I'm going to create a deck that helps you with this, right? So they each had their very distinct applicable problem, right? Of here's the issue, here's how we solve it. The issue here is that New England didn't have a deck, so it's a kind of different problem, right?
Yeah.
So it creates a different kind of mood. And so instead of being like already seeing the elements I know that needed to be there to solve those problems, this one's like, all right, now let me collect all of the folklore and then whittle it down, because again, like we have two decks. This could easily been like decks you could not shuffle. Like each of those could be twice as big. Like too much. It's a little area, but it's very densely populated with a lot of different folklore from spanning thousands of years. Right? It's like there's a lot, a little area. It's very little but mighty, as is the state. So that became the all right. Well, let me think about here. What am I going to choose that's also going to translate well into an oracle? All right, something that makes sense in its place, why it shows up in here, but is also handy for someone to use, so that because people are like, oracles are always so sweet. I'm like, my oracles are not.
Yes.
I don't mean for them to be have very strong personalities and tell people off, but they do. They absolutely do. And so, like right now, so the New England deck, the sea deck, if you think about sea mythology and history, there's a lot of tragedy. It's a lot. Like I created the shipwreck card, so like there's 5 cards that already been done. Like the land deck is done. Those cards are done. But the sea deck I'm working on for the next few months, and then that it will all be shipped in two segments. Like I dig the shipwreck card, and Stacey's like, "Well, that's a tower card if I ever saw it." I'm like, "Well, what?"
Yeah, I don't think you could really pick another one that is more obviously tower-like. So yeah.
It's on fire, it's sinking, it's falling apart, and you're on water. Yay!
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, but that is, and I'm sure that whittling process of being able to find the stories that are the most cross-culturally appropriate for people to make it sort of like useful, but at the same time it is very place-based and animist to a specific locale. So that's going to be very beautiful to see what you create for New England. I am up in Vermont, so
it's one state I have not yet been to. Actually, I've just 2, which is ridiculous.
You will have
Vermont.
to
So like I feel bad admitting it because it's right there, but as you know, 95 goes
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
that way. And North Dakota. And I've had gigs booked for both of them, and things have not worked out. So like I'm so close. Like I gotta get to Vermont by the end of this year.
Oh, it'll happen. I'm sure something will come up and that'll be beautiful. But that is really beautiful. So I'm very excited to sort of see, especially with the sea deck. Oh, I did not mean to make that pun, but I'm very excited for all of that to come out, and there'll be links to that. Before we wrap up, I always like to leave space for a question that I've noticed that sometimes when I've had guests on, or when I'm just talking to friends, there's a topic or something that you find yourself talking to people a lot about, like a piece of advice or just something that you feel is really timely that you want to say to people that is just really important about their practice, or that you're just like, I think we should talk more about this.
So very much of the moment is with everything going on. a lot of levels of things that we're experiencing, is that it might sound trite to some people, but investing in what makes your life better, investing in joy and in connection and beauty in your life right now is resistance and resilience. So it might seem like when I was writing finishing up Tarot by Tempest, I like, does the world need another tarot book? And like, the world is crumbling right now. Should I be working? I'm like, I've already done 3 different magical resistance and resilience books, anthologies. Like, should I be doing another one? Is that even more helpful? And the feedback was like, this is what people need to see more clearly in their lives and to connect to themselves and to each other. And it doesn't all have to be so big and so heavy. It's those little moments of joy and beauty and exploration and play that reminds us that we are human and that there are good people in the world, that we're mostly good people out there who want to create beauty and connect. And I think that's the thing, is like, don't feel guilty or shameful about those things. Like, yes, do the community work and the mutual aid, but take care of yourself as well. And that can involve play and imagination and beauty and silly things like Derpy the blue tiger from K-pop Demon Hunters, which is my current obsession.
Love that as well. Absolutely. Absolutely on the same page with you about that. And I agree that I think that reminder that the whimsy is sometimes the most powerful and the most important thing that we can make space for and time for in ourselves as we're going about this journey. So, well, thank you so much for that. Where can people find you? What is the best place for people to connect with you if they want to learn more outside of just the links that I'll put in the show notes?
My website is kind of the major hub, lauratempestzakroff.com. But I am fairly active on Instagram and Threads, and I have a YouTube channel that's LTZ Witch. So that's a lot of movement. It's not quite as active as I'd like it to be, because I'm working on a lot of different things. But I'm not so hard to find. Even if you misspell my name, you'll find me.
That is wonderful. I'm sure that people will be looking at all of those things and more, because you are always busy with so many projects, which I'm very glad about. So thank you very much. And I hope that, well, when those next 2 are out in the world, then I'll have to have you back on and we can discuss more about the New England connection in detail and have lots of other topics. So
excellent. Well, thank you so much for having me. I look forward to chatting again.
That is awesome. Thank you.
Black moon above, stars overhead. Don't you dare guide me back to my bed. The river is frozen.